So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're really glad to see such a great turnout to talk about our promotion system. My name is Kathy Hajar. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Development. And we also have Jane Salmon, who's Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, and Dr. Mark Albano, who's the Assistant Dean for Faculty Affairs. We're going to try to demystify the promotion process for you. And we're going to start off with the following goals. We're going to try to describe the faculty promotion pathways. We will also define scholarship as it relates to each pathway. I think one thing that we have now is a much broader definition of scholarship than the traditional view. And so scholarship really relates to all of the pathways, and we'll try to describe how that works. We also want to talk a little bit about the metrics for each pathway and emphasize that every pathway has critical value to the medical college. Each one of them is important. And finally, we'll talk about the promotion timeline and the process of promotion and what you have to do at each step along the way. So to begin, to sort of encapsulate our promotions process, essentially we have two pathways. And let me see if we have a point. Can you all see that? Okay. So we have two pathways. The first is the academic achievement and scholarship pathway, which is kind of similar to the old tenure track pathway, but we're now calling it this academic achievement and scholarship pathway, or the scholar pathway for short. And we have the excellence pathway. And under each of these two pathways, there are three areas in which you can be appointed: clinical innovation and expertise, investigation, and educational leadership and teaching. So if you put all of these together, then there are 6 different ways in which you can go up the academic ladder. 2 types of pathways and 3 areas of endeavor under each of the 2 pathways. And we have titles that relate to the pathways. So under the academic achievement and scholarship pathway, or the scholar pathway, we have what we used to refer to as unmodified titles. So you could be appointed, for example, as an assistant professor of surgery, an associate professor of neurology, a professor of pharmacology. Under the excellence pathway, on the other hand, we have titles that we used to call modified, but titles that specify what your area of endeavor is. For example, assistant professor of clinical medicine, associate professor of clinical surgery, professor of clinical psychiatry, if your main activity is clinical medicine. Or if you're a researcher, or so that you're on the investigation pathway here, then you might be an assistant professor of research in pediatrics, an associate professor of research in radiology, or professor of research in microbiology, and so forth. So titles are meant to indicate what your primary activity is on the excellence pathway. So the primary difference between the scholar pathway and the excellence pathway is the difference between the expectation for scholarship, and that is how much scholarship you are actually doing. There's less emphasis on scholarship in the excellence pathway and more on the academic achievement and scholarship pathway. So I thought it would be useful to take a minute and just talk about what is scholarship, how do we actually define it. So for our purposes today, scholarship is something that you do that is typically peer-reviewed, something that is disseminated to others outside your own environment, and it may be widely disseminated, and something that is adopted outside the local environment. So something that is used by others. And we have looked at this definition of scholarship by Boyer that was published back in 1990 by the Carnegie Foundation, called Scholarship Reconsidered: Priorities of the Professorate. And Boyer defines 4 types of scholarship, which are useful to think about, I think. The first is scholarship of discovery. And by this, we mean this is kind of the traditional definition of scholarship, original research that advances knowledge. For example, and I just made this up, but I think it's an example, discovery that the genetic information is encoded in DNA. That's a very fundamental discovery, and that would fall under this category. On the other hand, you could have scholarship of integration, and by that we mean the synthesis of information across disciplines or across topics within a given discipline or across time. For example, if you write an article about the history of DNA from its discovery to its modern use in precision medicine, that would be integration over time. Or if you discuss in writing how the discovery of DNA might allow us to understand the origin of disease, or how it influences treatment or dictates outcomes or risk factors. That's scholarship of integration. Thirdly, we have scholarship of application, which is really the very important interaction between research and what we do in practice, how we engage with the community with results that can be shared and evaluated. And an example there might be demonstrating that DNA sequencing of cancer cells can be used to guide treatment and improve outcomes for leukemia. So we're applying scientific knowledge to a practical outcome. And fourth, scholarship of teaching. By this we mean the not just the teaching itself, but the study of teaching and learning with public sharing, application, and evaluation. So for example, it could be a study that finds through analysis of educational metrics that if you teach molecular genetics to medical students, it improves their satisfaction, their board scores go up, and they get better residency outcomes, just as an example. So here are some examples of scholarship, and it's a pretty long list, and there are probably other things that are not on this list. But first of all, we have peer-reviewed publications, and this is the traditional older definition of scholarship. When you publish a paper in a clinical journal or basic science journal, that is clearly scholarship. But you might also be disseminating practice guidelines. How do we treat leukemia in children? Or position papers. You might publish something on innovations, on new devices or new treatments for disease X, or new technology that enables us to make better diagnosis. Oops. New curricula. So if you are an educator, you might develop a new curriculum for learning, for students to learn about the cardiovascular system, let's say. New assessment tools in education, and new products that are adopted elsewhere, for example, simulation protocols for education. Grants are examples of scholarships and can vary in scale and scope. Participation in study sections would be an example of scholarship because you are chosen because of your national or international reputation to serve as an expert on a given topic. Similarly, grant review boards, editorial boards for the same reason. If you're an expert on topic X, you may be added to an editorial board because of that expertise, or invitations to review manuscripts. Leadership roles on committees and academic societies, particularly at the national level, are also examples of scholarship because these allow you to have an impact on policies and procedures and outreach to the community, teaching many different areas. and invitations to speak. You're invited to speak outside of your own regional area because you have a reputation for being an expert in something. So again, two types of pathways, the scholar pathway, the excellence pathway, 3 areas of endeavor under each. That gives us 6 ways to go up the ladder. And so in thinking about this as a junior faculty member, you want to ask yourself, do you devote most of your effort to academic achievement and scholarship? That is, pick your pathway. So do you do that? Do you see yourself as a clinician scholar, a research scholar, or an education scholar? Most of your time is spent on scholarship. On the other hand, do you devote most of your effort to excellence in clinical care or in teaching or in investigation with less emphasis on scholarship? Then you would be on the excellence pathway. I just wanted to take a minute and show you a little bit of data about the composition of the faculty at Weill Cornell. And that's illustrated here. So what we have here on the y-axis are numbers of faculty. And along the bottom x-axis, we have assistant professors, associate professors, and full professors. And we're showing them on the scholar or excellence pathway over a period of years from 2014 to 2018. And you can see that for associate professors and full professors, the numbers over the years haven't changed very much for either the scholar or the excellence pathways. But the biggest change that we can see is that there's an increase, a steady increase in assistant professors on the excellence pathway, and maybe a slight decline on the scholar pathway, but the excellence pathway is the one that's shown the most change. And that is probably because our network of hospitals is increasing and we're hiring more and more clinicians on the excellence pathway to kind of man the trenches at the outlying hospitals. And so we now have probably twice as many assistant professors on the excellence pathway than we did, say, in 2014. And just a very quick word about tenure, because I think this is a subject that's a little bit obscure, but this is a pie chart that shows the proportion of faculty who have tenure in red, who are tenure eligible in orange, and who are not eligible, or for whom it's not applicable, in yellow. And so the point here is that tenure means different things at different institutions, but at our institution, it's a relatively rare event. Only 8% of our faculty are actually tenured. And this graph here just breaks this down to tenure status by gender. You can see that we have a total of 25 women that are tenured, or at least in 2017 when the data were assembled, and about 108 men who are tenured, with eligible faculty shown in orange. And if we look at tenure by ethnicity, you can see that of the 133 tenured faculty, 17 are Asian, 1 or less are African American, 113 are Caucasian, 3 are Hispanic. So tenure is a relatively rare event among our faculty. So at this point, I think I will turn the podium over to Dr. Salmon, who will talk to us in more detail about the pathways.